You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Welcome to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi. This is podcast episode number 1092, and I think we have a good one for you today. I'm excited to have Mei Lon Ding here. She's president of Personnel Service System Associates. Sorry about that. You know, a rapid rise in city and state minimum wage laws has combined with low unemployment. It's creating a compensation ticking time bomb. And I've asked Mei Lon to come and kind of share some of that with us today. So welcome to Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Let's start by having you tell me a little bit about your compensation consulting business and your experience. Set the context for why you're able to talk about this ticking time bomb.
Okay, so I design salary, bonus, stock, and employee performance management plans for companies.
That's a mouthful.
Yes, yes. Basically, I tell them how much to pay them and what is the basis for determining the right amount of pay for each person.
Okay.
Both their base salary as well as their incentive pay.
For what
and their
type of
stocks.
companies? You know.
My clients are primarily privately held.
Okay.
They're primarily ranging in size from $20 to $150 million in annual revenue. They're primarily located in Southern California.
Okay. Are there employees exclusively in Southern California, or
some of
the bigger
them
ones
are
have.
nationals. One of my largest clients has been Mercury Insurance, and of course they
sure.
have offices around the country. Selling
How much
auto
more
insurance.
complicated is it for the CEO of a company that has multi-state employees versus just California?
It is hugely more difficult because many states vary their employment laws from the federal law.
Okay.
And in particular, California
Right.
has very different laws from the federal law,
Uh-huh.
some of which I'm going to be talking about today.
Right. So, you know, we talk about this as the compensation ticking time bombs. I got that from you, which I kind of love that title. But why do you phrase it that way?
I think that there are two laws I'm going to talk about. One are the minimum wage laws, but the second one is the California Fair Pay Act.
Okay.
And I think they're both a little bit under the radar for employers, because I think employers think, oh, you know, if I'm in compliance with the federal law, well, I'm probably in compliance with the state law, and that's not true. A. B. These two laws are although they are in effect today, their impact is going to grow year by year. The minimum wage laws are set to increase at a state level at almost 10% a year. Compare that to average wage budgets for employers now, rising at around 3% a year.
Okay. But that's just the minimum wage.
That's just the minimum.
That just impacts the minimum wage.
Yeah, but also
Yes.
all the employees who are above but closer
Yes.
to the minimum wage. So basically, your hourly workforce, maybe all the way up to about $20 an hour, are all going to be expecting.
Impacted by this.
Yeah, they're all going to be impacted by it. And I think a lot of employers are going to be caught by surprise. They're thinking, oh, I don't have many employees near the minimum wage.
Right.
I have very few.
Right.
So why do I need to worry about this? Well, number one, because that minimum wage is rising so fast that it's going to get close to your lowest, as an employer, your lowest wage. It's going to get close pretty fast. And number two, the employees in your company who are closest to the minimum wage expect to maintain a significant differential to the minimum.
You know, you and I, when we were meeting earlier, I was telling you how one of the stories that I have in my new book, Killing Cats Leads to Rats, about unintended consequences of business decisions, is an example of Walmart, where they had this exact issue, where they decided to raise the pay of their minimum waged employees without taking into account the people that were a few dollars above them. And that created a huge issue for them with the employees that had been there for up to 10 years but were now making close to what these quote-unquote new hires were making. So it can happen in a big company like Walmart with thousands of employees, and it can happen in a small 50-person company here in Orange County too, can it, May?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, some major national retail employers and financial institutions have announced that on a national basis, they are dramatically increasing the lowest wage they pay across the country.
What's dramatic? Do you have the...
Well, so for instance, Bank of America says that their lowest wage they're going to pay anywhere in the country is going to be $15 an hour.
Wow.
And Wells Fargo, same thing, $15 an hour. And of course, that's the lowest anywhere. That means that in California, they'll probably pay higher.
Okay.
And in Los Angeles, maybe even higher than in California as a whole.
So I'm talking with May Long Ding, and where she's the president of Personnel Systems Associates, and we're talking about the ticking time bombs as it relates to compensation. And the first one we're dealing with in this block is the minimum wage. So you clearly explained that there's a federal kind of best practice, wage practice. There's states that have their own. But as far as minimum wage goes, aren't even locales and cities having their own view of what a living minimum wage should be? I mean, it's just even more complexity for the business owner.
That's right. That's right. So, of course, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. The California minimum wage this year is $11 an hour. Okay. But the Los Angeles minimum wage right now is $12. And in July 1st of this year, it's going to go to $13.25.
So this is part of the aggressive rate increases that you're talking about.
So Los Angeles County is significantly higher than the state. And the state is significantly higher than the Fed.
Right.
Okay. And if you go to cities like San Francisco or Berkeley or Mountain View, well, Berkeley, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale are already at $15 an hour.
Already at 15.
Already at 15. The state of California plans
and that's
to go
where
to 15.
that's where you employ them, not where they live. Is that right?
That's right. That's what it's.
So if your company is in Orange County, but your workers live in L.A., you pay them the prevailing rate for the city in which you operate.
In which that employee works.
Okay.
So if that employee lives in Orange County, but they're commuting to see their customers in Los Angeles County, you have to pay them the Los Angeles County.
Really?
Yes. It's where they are doing the work.
Whoa, so this is complicated. I mean, it requires someone with your expertise to be able to just explain to the CEO how to properly pay somebody.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
It can get very complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you don't pay them properly, some governmental agency finds out and penalizes you. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's unpleasant.
Yeah. I mean, the penalties are not only the back wages for 2 to 4 years back wages on what you failed to pay, but usually they double that amount in terms of making it a fine. And who
collects the fine?
Well, the
individual, the employee doesn't, though, right?
No, yeah, the employee gets their back wages.
Right.
The state of California collects a fine for themselves.
Yeah, for the trouble.
Right, for their trouble. And let's say that you had a number of employees who were not paid their due minimum wage, maybe because you didn't realize that even though your headquarters was in Orange County, they were doing their work in Los Angeles.
Right. I mean, I think that anybody's listening to the show today, if we had our engineer ready, would play the gong, because that was a very important. There you go. Our loyal listeners know if they hear the gong to maybe go back a couple minutes and pick up what May Long was talking about. But I would have thought, you corrected it for me, it's not where you employ them, it's where they do their work. So if they're an outside salesperson or a technician or something on site with it, you have to look at the city they're doing their work in.
That's right.
Oh,
and you
goodness.
get enough employees together, and they may not although they can have the state represent them for free, they can, if there's enough of them, they can find an attorney who will represent them for free.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
We're gonna take our break. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we're just gonna say enough is enough, and we're gonna take a very short commercial break. When we come back, we're gonna talk about the second law that you consider a
California Fair Pay Act.
California Fair Pay Act, the
Pay
second
Act.
part of the compensation ticking time bomb, with May Long Ding, president of Personnel Systems Associates. We'll be right back after this word from me.
Richard Franzi is the author of 2 popular business books for CEOs. His first book, Critical Mass, The 10 Explosive Powers of CEO Peer Groups, was the first book ever written on the secret value of CEO peer groups. His second book, now with newly updated information, is Critical Mass, The Power of CEO Guiding Principles. Richard's books contain powerful information to help CEOs running middle market companies gain valuable insight to improve their decision-making skills. Richard's books are available as paperbacks or Kindle versions from Amazon.com. To find them, type Richard Franzi in the search box.
And welcome back to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and all of our shows can be heard anytime on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker.com, several hundred former guest websites who've put their CEO's interview on their website. You know, since we started this show in 2009, we've reached hundreds of thousands of listeners through our live stream, podcasts, and other channels like YouTube. We do a video. You can watch this Facebook Live on Critical Mass or octalkradio.net. All right, I said in the second block we were going to talk about the second law that's a ticking time bomb from a compensation perspective. Maylon, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, the second law that I think that employers are underestimating is the new California Fair Pay Act. The federal law has had, something called the Equal Pay Act since the 60s, so it's been around for a long time. But California just passed their own version that is much more employee-friendly and much more demanding of employers.
What were they trying to solve? What problem were they trying to solve by passing this law?
Well, there's a couple things. Number one is that they wanted to make sure that employers were not basing pay offers for employees based on their former rate of pay at another employer, because they didn't want to institutionalize gender and race discrimination that already exists in the marketplace. So if women and minorities are underpaid and you just pay everyone 3% more than they used to get paid in their old employer, or 5% more than they used to get paid, then all you're doing is maintaining that same differential, that same illegal differential.
Okay, so that sounds like a perfectly logical thing that you want to do. And my book, Killing Cats Leads to Rats, is about unintended consequences of decisions that you make. Why do you consider this law a ticking time bomb then?
I consider it a ticking time bomb because the way they have worded this law is that an employer must base the offer on a job-related and business-related rationale. And the employer is obligated by law to be able to explain any difference in pay between two people doing similar, not exactly the same, but similar work. And the truth is that traditionally, a majority of employers have based pay decisions on discretionary and subjective factors.
Oh, boy. Okay, so even independent of the not paying them what they made before, not looking at their past history, even with your current employee population, you could be at risk. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is a part of the law that the majority of employers, particularly smaller and middle market employers who don't have a HR manager to keep on top of this stuff, they may not understand how tough this new law is.
But when would you be called on the carpet to justify that difference? How would that happen, May?
So, because this is a new law, the issues are being tested in the courts right now. And the question is, will the state care if there's a 10-cent difference between two people doing pretty similar work where you don't have any objective justification for that 10-cent difference? Think back to how these people got to their current pay levels.
Right.
Well, because it used to not be against the law to ask them what they used to make, right? And you used to base your pay offer on what they used to make.
Right. You didn't want to underpay them. You had to pay them a something.
Yeah, so over
More.
time, so now they've worked for you for 10 or 12 years.
Right, but they came in at that base pay. Is what you're, so you
Correct.
have this grandfathered problem.
That's right. Exactly. And so then you've given them increases over time. And so you might say, oh, well, this one's a good performer. I'm going to give them 5%.
Yeah, right.
And this one's not as good, and I'm going to give them 3%. And this one's terrible. I'm going to give them nothing.
Yes.
Okay. But you have to be able to justify those adjustments based not just on your subjective assessment of this one's a good performer, this one's an average performer, this one's a poor performer. It has to be based on objective criteria.
Wow.
Objective
Okay,
criteria.
but I'm going to ask you again.
Yeah.
Who is going to call you on the carpet for this? When does this happen? Like, you know, right
Well,
now.
right now, it's the big employers. Big employers are our number one target because plaintiffs' attorneys will make the most money.
Right.
Because if they're out of compliance, then those plaintiffs' attorneys representing all those employees that are out of compliance, they're going to make they're going to make many millions of dollars on each case. The plaintiff's employers. So,
Okay, but you're an expert, compensation expert.
Mhm.
You help companies do this stuff. Heretofore, wouldn't you think that this problem is existing in most companies? Not intentionally, but just by virtue of how you explained it?
yes. And so that's why I call it the ticking time bomb. And it's going to explode.
That's an unintended consequence of the law. It wasn't really intended to attack this thing. I mean, because what's your recourse then? My expectation is then the only choice the employer has is to bring everybody up to the highest paid person in that category.
So yes, that's right. In fact, the law prevents you from decreasing anyone's pay. The law says you can only increase pay. You cannot decrease pay.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it's gallows humor. I mean,
Okay,
what the hell?
So here's my recommendations for employers. Number one, you need to go through and you need to examine your job descriptions and your job family design because the law is focused on jobs which are similar.
Yes.
Significantly similar, almost equal.
Okay.
Okay? So your number one defense is, well, they're not the same job.
Okay.
So-
But if they are the same job,
But if
you've
they
got a
are the
problem,
same
right?
job,
So
you
if you
got-
have a bunch of warehouse workers, they're all warehouse workers.
Yes.
You may have managers and supervisors, but at the end of the day, the largest
Right.
population are those people moving boxes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, my
And you could
goodness.
say, well, managers are different from
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
non-managers. Yes, you can
supervisors,
say
yeah,
that.
right, you
But
got
let's
that.
say you have a warehouse worker 1 and a warehouse worker 2. Okay. Then the question is, are they really doing different duties? Are the ones that are in 2, are they clearly more experienced? What is the basis for deciding this one's a 2 and this one's a 1?
Okay.
So you're going to have to defend, as an employer, you have to defend those decisions. So that's number one, job descriptions and your job family design. Number 2 is create a pay policy that links pay to defensible factors and measurements. What is defensible? That's objective.
Numbers.
Yes, numerical.
Facts.
That's right.
You moved 6 boxes, he moved 5. I'm giving
Yes.
you more.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Number 3, you need to do an internal audit on your current pay practice so you can fix it. You need to
Right.
figure out what's out of line
Right.
and go in and fix it.
Right, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
That's right. Don't wait for the plaintiff's attorneys to
Right.
find you.
Right.
And like I said, they're probably going to start with the biggest companies and work their way down to the smaller ones. Right?
Okay.
Start with where the most money is to be made. So the thing is, you don't want your internal HR department or your finance department to do this audit because then that becomes evidence for the plaintiff's attorney.
Oh, boy.
You want to work through your outside legal counsel so that you keep that attorney-client privilege on the findings.
Boy, and we've been talking a lot about attorney-client privilege. So if you're listening to this as a live stream or a not too far ago podcast, it's all over the news. So how can we not understand that concept?
Right. And ideally, that attorney actually hires a third party to do the analysis so your own internal employees don't know the answer.
Is this an expensive thing for these business owners to go through?
Yeah, it is expensive, but it's more expensive to get caught with your pants down.
Wow, but that's always the case, isn't it? I mean, it's like, geez, you only have so much money to put at these different problems. You got to figure out where's your biggest risk. Oh man, this is
Right.
this is unfortunate. Okay, do you have any other recommendations that
Well,
we didn't?
and then you need to adjust those employees' pay
Yeah.
as soon as possible, and you need to consult with your attorney about possible back pay obligations because technically you could argue that you need to make these things right, starting with the effective date of the law.
When's that?
I believe it was January 1st of last year
Okay.
for gender pay discrimination, January 1st of this year for race-based discrimination.
And we're in April right now, so it's a quarter
Yeah.
live. So I mean, I'm just in my head as you're explaining this. I'm just playing a scenario where, let's say, Paul, the engineer, is our boss, and you make significantly more to me, and we both do this radio show, talk show thing. And Paul comes to me and brings me up to pay parity with you. You find out that I'm at pay parity with you. Now you're mad at Paul because there's some reason why he's been paying you more all these years than me, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden now I'm making more money just for no reason. Wow, the cultural issues that go along with this, right?
Yes, they're very big. So trying to explain to employees why you're adjusting the pay and how you're adjusting the pay.
Because I found that while in my long corporate history, you tell people that pay is confidential, this isn't to be shared, but somehow this information gets out.
Okay, well, that's a part of the new law. The new law says that when you hire an employee, actually when you are interviewing an employee, an interviewing employee has the right, and you are then obligated to respond with the pay range for that job.
Okay, a pay range, that's
Okay.
reasonable. Yeah.
Number two, employees have a right to discuss their wages with each other.
Oh my God, that's a part of the law?
That's a part.
So you can't
of
say to people that's confidential anymore?
That's right. You cannot.
I'd be breaking the law, not knowing it.
That's right.
Gosh, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I don't have any employees either in this conversation. Holy cow. All right.
So it's not that hard for them to figure out something is not right.
Right. They talk among themselves at the break room now that they're empowered. Hey, if someone would like to learn more about your business, Personnel Systems Associates, how do they find you online?
They should go to www.personnelsystems.com. So that's PERSONNELSYSTEMS.com.
All right. Well, I think based on the quality of the content that you delivered, that's a well worth trip to go and find her website, ladies and gentlemen. And obviously your contact information and everything else is provided there. You know, I have to thank you for being a friend of the program and part of the critical mass community. I'm going to have to get you into my community to talk to my business owners about this. This will be an interesting conversation, to say the least. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Rick.
I appreciate it. All right, and I'd also like to thank our engineer, Paul Roberts, who we referenced a little bit earlier in the show, as well as our producers, without whom we wouldn't have a show, frankly, Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Haley Stern. If you'd like to connect with me on social media, and I would love to connect with you on social media, let's start with LinkedIn. You can find me as Richard Franzi, Franzi. Once we get connected on LinkedIn, we can explore other social media channels. And until our next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.
You have been listening to Critical Mass Radio Show Business Talk Show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Almond Board of California. Did you know almond farmers and processors are supporting research into restoring depleted groundwater through on-farm recharge? Grow what you know at almonds.com/water.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Sad news today. One of public radio's most beloved figures, NPR newscast pioneer Carl Kasell, has died at the age of 84. NPR's Giles Snyder reports Kasell is being remembered as a rock of the newsroom, whose steady baritone anchored NPR's newscasts for decades.
Carl Kasell was on the air when Morning Edition debuted on November 5th, 1979. Good morning. I'm Carl Castle.
Castle spent the next 30 years anchoring NPR newscasts in the morning, most of that time alongside fellow newscaster Gene Cochran. She says listeners could rely on him to remain calm when the world was anything but.
So that you felt, all right, this is huge, but it's going to be okay.
After becoming